Luminosity selections aren't always the best tool for making single exposure tonal adjustments, but in the right situations they can provide better control, precision, and flexibility than the other methods that we've covered. They offer the ability to focus adjustments on specific tonal zones like the sliders in Lightroom and Adobe Camera Raw do, but they can also be customized to isolate specific tones much better. Unlike using Lightroom or Adobe Camera Raw, or the shadows highlights adjustment in Photoshop, luminosity masks can be applied to any kind of adjustment layer, and they can be refined and customized like any other mask. In the last chapter, I showed how to make basic luminosity masks and also how to make some simple tonal adjustments using them. As you probably noticed, the adjustments I did caused that familiar loss of local contrast that is common when light tones are darkened and dark tones are lightened. The result is a more tonally balanced image, but one that lacks contrast and midtone structure. The greatest strength of luminosity selections is also their greatest weakness. Because they feather seamlessly throughout the image, they make very smooth and non-evident adjustments. But this also means that adjustments do bleed into unintended areas of the image. What we really need is to be able to use a luminosity selection to target an adjustment to the intended tonal zone, but not allow the adjustment to continue all the way into regions that we don't want to adjust. There are many ways to accomplish this, and I cover many of them in my previously mentioned series called The Complete Guide to Luminosity Masks. In this tutorial series, I'll stick with my favorite method, a technique called masking the mask. My approach is usually to begin working with the highlights using either levels or curves adjustment layers in combination with lights luminosity masks. People often ask what the difference between curves and levels is. They both allow you to make tonal adjustments. I'm going to use Tony's TKAction Panel to make a levels adjustment layer. Levels is more intuitive, but it's limited to shadows, highlights, and midtone adjustments. In comparison, curves allows you to place points on the curve so that you can adjust different tonal regions while leaving other areas unaffected. So for example, if I wanted to adjust the lower midtones while leaving the middle midtones and highlights and darkest shadows alone, I could do that by placing different points on the curve. And so now when I work with these lower midtones, all the other tones are left unaffected. That kind of control just isn't available in levels. However, levels almost always accomplishes what I need, so if I can get it done with levels, I go with that. I don't need either of those adjustment layers just yet, so I'm going to select them both and use the delete button on the TKActions panel to delete them. I'll start by using the TKActions panel to evaluate some different light selections. Instead of creating a Lights 1 selection manually using the Channels panel like we did in the last chapter, I can simply just click on the Lights 1 in the Lights row. If I want to see a visual representation of which tones are selected, I can then click the View button. The darker the red color, the more the pixels in that region are selected and the more they'll be adjusted. Areas of the image that don't show any red are essentially not selected and will not be adjusted. Once I've evaluated the selection, I can click Continue to go back to the selection view. I could then either try loading a different selection by clicking one of the other numbered buttons, or if I like that selection, I can create my levels adjustment layer using the panel. And because that selection was loaded, the adjustment layer comes with that Lights 1 mask attached. Now any adjustments that I make will be constrained by that luminosity mask. I'll begin by clicking the Multiply button on the TKActions panel to set the blending mode of that adjustment layer to multiply, and this darkens the image through the mask. If I hold down the Shift key and click on the mask, I can disable the mask and we can see what that adjustment would look like without the luminosity mask providing its function. If I want to make some additional adjustments, I can open up the levels adjustment dialog, and I may want to work with my midtones a little more and maybe even the darks a little bit more until I get that adjustment just how I want it. And as I was making that adjustment, I was really just focusing on the sky part of the image. The adjustment is bleeding over into the landscape, and it's actually having an effect on the highlights in the landscape that I don't want it to have. This is where the masking the mask technique comes in. It might make sense to just paint on the luminosity mask with a black brush to remove the adjustment from places where I don't want it. And that does work. The problem is, though, that if I go out into areas where I don't want it, I can't just go and paint with the opposite colored brush to get it back. Let's view the mask itself to see what's going on here. What's happening is that as I paint with black, I am masking out the adjustment that is bleeding down into areas of the image that I don't want it. But when I go over into an area where I do want the adjustment and decide I want to paint back with the opposite color, the detail of the luminosity mask is now lost. So let's back up out of those adjustments. You might also think, why not just add another mask to that adjustment layer? Now you could paint white and black on that mask and leave the luminosity mask unaltered. Unfortunately, Photoshop doesn't allow us to place a second layer mask on a layer. This second mask is what's called a vector mask, and it doesn't work the same as a regular layer mask. The solution requires the following steps. First, make sure that you have the layer highlighted blue. Then hold down the Shift key and click on the group folder icon. This places that levels adjustment inside a group folder, and I can collapse the folder or expand the folder to see the layer. While you can't add another mask to the layer itself, you can add a mask to a group. So the next step is, with the group layer highlighted blue, hold down the Alt or Option key on a Mac and click the layer mask icon. This adds a black mask to the group, and that conceals any adjustments contained inside the group. Now I'm going to paint on that black mask with a white brush, perhaps with an opacity of about 50 or so. And this will allow me to paint in that adjustment that's contained in that group. But because the luminosity mask inside the group is controlling where that adjustment's going, it's helping feather the transition along the edge. So I can paint in that darkening adjustment to the sky, and even though I'm doing it with a very crude hand-painted mask, the luminosity mask inside the group is unaffected, and it's controlling how that transition zone is being blended. So it's done a really nice job of naturally bringing in that adjustment. But if you feel like in any area the adjustment has gone in places where you don't want it to go, you can go back to that group mask, select the opposite color brush, and then paint that adjustment out of areas where you don't want it. You still need to be careful along these boundary areas and make sure that you feather your hand painted mask, but you don't have to be as careful as you would otherwise because of the control the luminosity mask is giving you. So I like that sky adjustment. However, I think I'd like to make a little bit more of an adjustment to the brightest part of the sky. So I'm going to close this first group, and I might even want to name that group Lights 1, just so I remember which mask or which selection I use to do that first adjustment. Now I want to look for another more restrictive light selection that will target some adjustments more directly to this brightest area of sky. So I already used the Lights 1. Let's see what the Lights 2 looks like. So I'll click on the number 2, and then I'll view that selection. And that's done a pretty good job of getting that brightest part of the sky selected. But I'm going to look at a Lights 3 just to compare. So I'm going to select the 3 button and then click the View button. And I think that one may do even a better job or constrain the adjustment more to that part of the sky that I really want. So I'll click continue, and knowing that that's the right mask or the mask that I want to use, I'll now, with the selection loaded, click the levels button in the TKActions panel to create that new levels adjustment. I'll hold down the Alt or Option key and click on the mask just so I can view that mask. And if I want to, I can try another multiply blending mode on that to darken, and then open up the levels and work with both the midtones and maybe the shadows, and maybe highlights just slightly if I want to keep those brightest highlights brilliant, and see how that adjustment looks. Now this adjustment, because of the mask, has really done a good job of being restricted to that brightest part of the sky. However, it is bleeding over into my mountain just a little bit in places where I don't want it to. So to mask the mask again, I'll repeat that same set of steps as before. I'll hold down the Shift key with this top levels adjustment layer selected and click on the group icon, and that places that adjustment layer in this group. And I'm going to go ahead and call this group Lights 3, just so I remember what that adjustment's doing. Then with the group selected, I'll hold down the Alt or Option key and add a black mask. And now I will use my white brush to paint on that black mask and just paint in the adjustment precisely where I want it. And with a 50% brush, I can do it incrementally, and I can also work along that edge knowing that the underlying luminosity mask is going to help control how that edge is feathered. Okay, so I think that looks pretty good. Let's see how it looks. Yeah, so now I've got that adjustment into the sky, and it's not bleeding over into my mountain, but the transition zone looks very natural. And if I want to make sure that I don't get it into the snow up here at all, I can go back to a black brush and just make sure my edge there looks good. Go back to a white brush. Yeah, I think that looks good. Excellent. If I feel I've made all the adjustments that I want to make to the sky, I can further organize my layer stack by placing these two groups into their own group. Select both of those groups and then hold down the Shift key and click the group icon one more time, and that places those two groups inside another group, and I'm going to call this group Sky Adjustments. So I know that in here all of my sky adjustments are contained, and so I can turn those all on and off in one go, and I can also still open it up and get into those actual adjustments. Now let's work with lightening up the shadows a bit. So I'll go back up to the TKActions panel, and now instead of working with the lights selections, I'll work with the dark selections. Let's start by looking at a darks 1 selection. So I click on that to load it, and then click the view button to view it. And I can see that it's doing a good job of targeting the dark areas of the landscape, and it's also going to be making adjustments in the darkest areas of clouds. But because I'm going to mask the mask, I don't worry about where that is going to overlap up into the sky. But just out of curiosity, I'm going to load a darks 2 selection and view that just to see. And that's still going to do a great job of working with the landscape, not target the sky quite as much. So either one of those would probably work for what I'm going to do. Let's try working with that one. Click continue and then load another levels adjustment layer. And this time I could set the screen blending mode if I wanted to and just lighten with the screen blending mode, or I could leave it on normal and just do it all through the sliders in the levels adjustment. So for example, if I want to lighten up there a little bit, and I actually want to lighten the highlights in those dark areas, so I want to keep those midtones darker, and I want to brighten up just the brightest areas of the darks. So I'm really just looking in the shadowed area to see how this is looking, and trying to open this up so that my shadows are going to have the kind of detail that I want. And when I get that where I want it down in this area, I can see that it's definitely having an impact on the sky that I don't want it to have. So this is where I hold down the Shift key again and place that adjustment in a group. We'll call this group Darks 2 because I was using the Darks 2 selection. And then I will place a black mask on the group by holding down the Alt or Option key and clicking on the mask. And now I can use the white paintbrush to go through and paint that adjustment in just where I want it. I'm going to go to about 60% on the opacity of this brush. And I know that down here I want to do a lot of painting of that. And then I'm going to reduce the opacity to about 30%, make the brush a little smaller, and then paint right along this area through here. And because of the underlying luminosity mask, it's going to not bleed over into the sky because that luminosity mask is controlling it and not allowing it to do that, or anywhere it does it, it's going to feather very naturally. And I also want to work right along the edge of that bright part of the mountain. All right, let's see how that looks. Yeah, so not too bad. I can see a little bit going up into the sky here where I don't want it. So I'm going to shift back to my black brush and just feather along this edge a little bit. Again, painting on the group mask, not on the luminosity mask itself. And that way I maintain all the detail in that luminosity mask. And go back. Switching back and forth between a black and white brush is really easy to do. So I can just kind of work with that and get this whole transition zone looking how I want it. And I think that looks maybe pretty good. Now that I've opened up some of those shadows a bit and also tried to maintain some contrast while we did it, next I want to work on these areas, through these trees, the aspen trees down here, and also up on the mountain. Not quite sure yet which tonal zones those are going to fall into, so I'm going to take a look at a few different selections to see. Let me just see again what a Darks 1 looks like. So I load that and then view it. And that Darks 1 really is going to encompass a lot of this area down here, but not the bright part of the mountain and not as much this brightest area of the aspen trees. So let's see if I can find what's going to isolate or hit that target for us. Let's see. If I try midtones number 3 here, let me just see what that's going to do. So the midtone 3 is going to do a great job up here in the bright parts of the mountain and pretty good job in the highlights of the aspen trees down here. So let's start with those two. First, I'm going to go back to the Darks 1, load that, make a levels adjustment layer, and then make an adjustment through that mask. And what I want to do is bring in some nice, really dramatic light I want to enhance that dramatic light that was brushing across these treetops through here, and also bring in a little better light and color density into these aspen trees. So that adjustment has done a pretty good job of that, but of course it's having some effects in places I don't want it to. So I'm going to mask the mask again, shift and click on the group icon. This is going to be a Darks 1 adjustment through here. Alt or Option click on the mask icon to add that black mask. And now with my white brush at maybe 40% opacity, I can begin brushing that adjustment in through here and down into the brighter parts of the aspen trees and all along this zone. And again, not having to worry too much about the boundary lines because that luminosity mask is controlling how that feathers throughout the image. So it stays looking nice and natural. Yeah, that's looking pretty good through there. Okay, finally, let's go to that midtone 3 selection. That selection's loaded. Going to now attach it to a levels adjustment layer And let's just view the mask so we can see. Yeah, so that's really going to hit the trees and the mountain. It's also going to go into the sky, but we're going to mask the mask so it only goes where we want it. Okay, so let's work on that adjustment. So I'm going to bring over the highlight slider right to the edge there, and then bring in the midtones a little bit, and really trying to just kind of maximize the contrast in this area and up on the mountain. All right, so that looks pretty good, and that actually looks pretty good throughout the image, but I'm still going to mask the mask. So shift click on the group, name this one, this is a midtone 3, and alt click or option click on the mask icon to add the black mask. And now again with the lower opacity brush, maybe 30% this time, white brush painting on the black mask, I'm going to paint some of that into the mountain to give it a little more punch or pop, and it's getting a little more subtle there. And I can work through on the aspen trees as well. Looks pretty good. The aspen trees are maybe a little too dark, so I want to make another adjustment that's really just targeted at those. So let's leave that midtone now. And finally, let's look for a selection that'll really hit those aspen trees. Let me try midtone 4 and view it. Yeah, I think that's going to be the one. So I'll type continue and load a levels adjustment layer with that mask. And now I'm going to make this adjustment just really looking at the aspen trees. So I'm going to bring up the brightness on those aspen trees a lot. And I may even overdo it a bit and get them brighter than I want, because I can incrementally bring in that adjustment. There we go. Okay, so now mask the mask. That was a midtone 4. Add a black mask. I can come in with the white brush and really just add in those highlights to the trees just where I want them, 30% at a time, just brushing it in. And again, that luminosity mask underlying is helping to guide those adjustments so it's not bleeding over into areas where I don't want it. All right, let's see how that looks. And I could keep working with refining my hand-painted mask to really get that looking good. But I think that does a pretty good job. And now all of these adjustments all the way down to here all are working on the landscape. So I'm going to go ahead and select all of those, and holding down the shift key, click on the group icon one more time and call this land adjustments. So now I can turn on and off my land adjustments in one click, and I can turn on and off my sky adjustments in one click, and I can hold down the alt key and click on the eye of the background image to see the before and the after. That really does a good job being able to create that tonal balance within a single exposure image. So working with a variety of different luminosity masks, adjustments can be made in each tonal region to balance the dynamic range while also maintaining good contrast.